I got a title slide that might be helpful.
I'm going to stop it then and restart it. Hello, everybody. We're going to give it a few minutes while folks join us. Welcome to the Chicago Wilderness Alliance Cafe, Emerging Markets, Agricultural and Wetland Mitigation Banking. Thank you to Mike Glester from Magnolia Land Partners for hosting this cafe. Feel free to keep yourself on mute during the presentation portion, but there will be time for question and answer. And put any questions in the chat if you want to make sure just that they don't get lost in the conversation.
I'll be stopping periodically too, so spit out questions at that point as well.
All right. I'm recording this event and we'll post the recording on the website as well as send out a recording and a PDF of the slides from today's presentation to everyone who registered. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike and you can get started when you're ready.
Great. Thanks, Laura. So I think maybe start off, we'll take a step back here. There's a few things I want to talk about that I can use the same terms over and over again. And I just want to make sure that we're kind of all on the same page on what that is. I'm kind of using the term mitigation here a lot. And mitigation can mean a whole bunch of stuff, but at its core, it's basically you're compensating for unavoidable adverse impacts elsewhere. So for our purposes in ecological mitigation, there's an impact at spot A, and then you are going to compensate for that at spot B. When you do mitigation, you don't necessarily have to have a bank. So a bank is a specific type of mitigation. However, it's a lot easier to say mitigation bank when we're speaking about a lot of these projects. So oftentimes those terms are kind of interchangeable. And the main thing I'm going to talk about today is agricultural wetland mitigation banking. And in that instance, they are all actual banks. So I feel like it's a little bit of a disclaimer that like, I know not all mitigation are banks, but kind of for our purposes today, they are. When you talk about a bank sponsor, that's kind of your mitigation provider. And I'll use Magnolia, I'll use our company, kind of interchangeable with that today as well. Because we are the only mitigation provider, bank sponsor for ag banking in Illinois and Indiana. So just kind of easier to do that. And then agricultural wetland mitigation banking is a bit of a mouthful, so I will oftentimes just call it ag banking. And then the final thing to maybe sort of define is what is an environmental market. And so it's these novel environmental solutions that address a reoccurring problem. And in order to have a market, you need somebody to buy, somebody to develop and sell, and then some sort of regulatory agency to enforce. So there's a little bit of background on some of the things we're talking about today. A little bit on me. So my name is Mike Glester, and I have had a bunch of different roles in restoration, specifically in the Chicago Wilderness region. I kind of started off as a field staff where I had a backpack on full of herbicide, 10 hours a day, walking through fields, spraying weeds. I've been fleet manager project manager, consultant. And those are all kind of on the for-profit side of roles in of careers in restoration. But I've also been a land manager for a large park district, Bolingbrook Park District. So I've seen a little bit of the public side of restoration as well. And I gave I was part of a panel last year for Chicago Wilderness Congress about careers in conservation. And in that panel, we kind of talked about, our careers and where we saw careers in conservation headed. And I thought that was a good place to kind of talk about how some things are changing a little bit. And I get to see that change pretty much every day at my current position as the director of operations for Magnolia Land Partners. And Magnolia is kind of nice because there's elements kind of taken from the non-for-profit field as well as it's a for-profit company. But oftentimes in restoration or conservation, it's those not-for-profits that kind of are the ones that conserve the land, and the for-profits, very generally speaking, kind of help manage it and do the restoration work. Well, Magnolia gets to kind of combine some of those, where we have conserved 18,000 acres of land across the United States. And we've been doing that using these environmental solutions with market-based approaches. So what does that look like? And one of the things I want to touch on in this presentation is I want to make us aware of some of these new markets that are kind of coming online in the Chicago region, and then also dig into one specifically, and that's going to be the ag banking. Also, quick note, this is not going to take 2 hours. It'll probably be closer to an hour. I only have 35 slides, so I figure I'll let you know that now. But the way that Magnolia does conservation across the country, our big bread and butter is species conservation banks. And honestly, I could probably talk all day about that. We have projects all over the country, and there's conservation for specific species. Some of the drivers for those banks has been renewable energy. So something like the turbines that are up for wind development, those sometimes kill bats and things that fly, and they need to mitigate for that in other places. And so there's projects all over the country. There's bats are kind of in the Rust Belt in the Midwest here. We have bald eagle projects in North New York. There's snake conservation projects we have in New Jersey, sage grouses in Nevada, lesser prairie chicken in Colorado, migratory waterfowl in North Dakota. So these species conservation banks are certainly a new market for conserving land. Somewhat closer to home are green infrastructure projects. There is a program in Washington, D.C. that Magnolia helped do some of the first projects with. Basically, it's a stormwater credit exchange. The idea behind it is in DC, if you're a developer and you want to build your building, you need to be able to handle so much stormwater per year, per event, whatever it is. If you can't do all that on the footprint that you're trying to build your development, you can then buy credits from, say, Magnolia, who developed a rain gardens that hold X amount of gallons of runoff. And then you can sell those credits to the developer, and then they can be in compliance and build their structure. That has been going in DC for a few years now, but Chicago is maybe 2 years into developing something similar to that. Basically the same thing. That, I believe, is going through the Nature Conservancy, and I think that program is called Storm Store. So if you're interested in more about the green infrastructure market stuff, I'd check that out. Storm Store, Nature Conservancy. We'll probably have more information on that. Another market that is new and developing is nutrient trading. So if you think of something like a wastewater treatment facility. When they have their discharge, they have, or they may have heightened levels of nutrients. Phosphorus is usually one of the big ones. And in order for them to still be in compliance with their discharge, they could potentially, you can use wetlands and buffer zones to help pull some of that phosphorus out of the discharge. And you can essentially sell those credits. That again is new, not quite developed so much in Illinois and Indiana, at least not what I've seen yet. But Wisconsin, I believe, has a program that is got its feet wet a little bit. And then the final one, new market that I want to talk about is the one we're going to be mostly talking about is this agricultural wetland mitigation banking. I want to talk about it for a few reasons. One is it's a somewhat of a mature market for an emerging market. I think the first programs were done in 2016, and it is spread to a number of states. And we're all kind of working at the same time to figure it out. And there's been credit sales, and it seems like it works pretty well where it works. So probably a good one to highlight to kind of show the progression of some of these projects. And Magnolia has done we're the first people to do it in Illinois and Indiana. So we kind of have a broad range of what the program is like to take off and go. But there are new programs, agricultural wetland mitigation banking programs that just got grant funding last year in 2022. And so like late 2022. So they should probably have credits available next year. So it's growing in the region. It's a little bit mature in Illinois, but the rest of the Chicago wilderness region, we'll probably be seeing more of this in the future. And then the final reason why I want to talk about it is probably the most important, is if you look at nutrient trading or green infrastructure, or even these species conservation banks, these are all ecological solutions for problems that large developers have. You know, nutrient trading is for wastewater treatment facilities, and the stormwater credits are for developers, land or building developers. Species conservation banks a lot of times are for energy development, renewables. But the ag banking is, there's conservation solutions for everyday people. I mean, these projects and these credits are set aside solely for ag producers. So if you're Target or Walmart, you can't buy these credits. This is solely for people in USDA programs. And it's nice to be able to bring some of these ecological solutions to just everyday people. So with that, I think maybe I'll pause and see if there are any questions on some of these markets in general. Very good. Oh, there's a chat. Nope. All right, seeing none, I am going to move on. So we're going to be talking about these emerging markets, specifically agricultural wetland mitigation banking. Quick overview of the slides is I'll talk about ag banking a little bit. And then there's kind of two major parties in the program, and it's landowners who need credits and landowners who need to purchase credits. And then I'll talk about some of the pricing and service areas for these bank sites, and then our approach to the program development. And then I'll talk about some of the kind of where we're at in the region today. All right, first things first is, what is the problem? The problem is that ag producers find themselves outside of compliance with USDA guidelines for wetlands. That means they filled or drained a wetland after 1985. Why did they do it? Maybe they didn't realize the area was a wetland. Maybe they didn't know about the Farm Bill rules. Maybe they didn't care. For our purposes, we don't really care either. We just kind of know that at this situation, a farmer finds themselves out of compliance with USDA programs, and they want to get it mitigated. The reason why they need to get it mitigated is there's a swamp buster provision in the Farm Bill that basically states that people who convert wetlands to allow for production of agricultural commodities will be ineligible for USDA benefits until the functions of the converted wetlands are mitigated or restored. So if a farmer wants to be in USDA programs, I think there's some loaning options that farmers can have through the USDA. There's other programs like CRP that they wouldn't be able to be enrolled in if they were outside of compliance. But the big one is crop insurance. So they would be ineligible for crop insurance if they have wetland, if they're outside of the wetland compliance. So there have been some traditional solutions, we'll say, to this problem. One is if you're found to be out of compliance, you can break up drainage structures, restore that area, and then not farm that section anymore. You could mitigate that wetland somewhere else on your property. You could get a friend to let you mitigate on their property. All those solutions work, but there is a fair amount of time and effort needed from the NRCS and the landowner to fully fix those impacts. Chances are the farmer isn't, a wetland ecologist on the side to make that situation go away quicker. So there's a lot of correspondence back and forth. There could potentially be a lot of money exchanged to try to figure this out. So there is to be a new solution of buying wetland credits from a mitigation provider. And this possible option kind of came out of the USDA's Agricultural Wetland Mitigation Banking Program. And this is a grant through the USDA to specifically develop agricultural wetland mitigation banks across the US. And that initial grant program kicked off in 2016 and has now expanded to 14 states from the original 10. So that's why I kind of call it it's a more mature market. It is growing. And these ones that are bolded here, I don't know if you can tell, are states where I'm pretty confident have multiple banks. So that's Georgia, Iowa, Illinois, Michigan, Nebraska, South Dakota, and Indiana. And then the ones in purple here are the banks that the states that Magnolia has banks in, which is Illinois, Nebraska, and Indiana. Actually, we don't have them in Nebraska and Indiana yet, but we got grants to build them in Nebraska and Indiana. These are newer, and so soon we'll have some open banks. But in Illinois, Magnolia was awarded a grant in that first funding cycle to develop ag banking program in Illinois. And since that initial grant, we've got 2 more grants in Illinois, and then the one in Nebraska and one in Indiana. One thing that is kind of been interesting to me is each state is a little bit different. The grant funding comes from the USDA, but it gets filtered through each state's NRCS, the state NRCS office. And it's been interesting because we are in 3 different states. I think we're actually the only company that is in multiple states. But it's interesting to see how different each state is. So when I'm talking about kind of the program here going through the ag banking, it's probably mostly going to be Illinois, just because we've kind of developed that the furthest. But just know Indiana, and then even the banks that we aren't a part of, which would be in Wisconsin and Michigan. They might all act a little bit differently, but I think the concept is still relatively the same. All right. So what is agricultural wetland mitigation banking? The biggest thing to compare agricultural wetland mitigation banking to is kind of traditional 404 mitigation banking. So I think kind of the first thing to answer isn't necessarily what is agricultural wetland mitigation banking, but it's more like what isn't it? And what it isn't is the traditional 404 banking. And some of the key differences are here. The ag banking are credits specifically for agricultural producers. And you could probably subdivide that even more to credits specifically created for agricultural producers enrolled in USDA programs. Whereas the larger commercial wetland mitigation banks and credits are generated for larger industrial commercial buildings. Think the O'Hare expansion. I think that funded a lot of wetland creation projects in Chicago wilderness footprint. This isn't that program. Additionally, the regulatory oversight for agricultural wetland mitigation credits is the NRCS, as opposed to Army Corps of Engineers for kind of 404 wetland banking. And then the final thing is just the cost. This program is meant to be an option for farmers. And sometimes when you have, well, not sometimes, the credits for these commercial mitigation banks can be very, very expensive. You get $100,000 per credit. Obviously, that's not a real option for ag producers, at least not at the scale that need the credits. And so this option, this ag banking option, is meant to be much more affordable and a viable option for them to use. All right, a very high level on how ag banking works is, we'll say Magnolia finds a landowner with suitable land for wetland restoration. We will essentially give them a payment to put protection on their property. Oftentimes that's a conservation easement. And in return for that, we get credits that we now make available as compensatory wetland credits, who other landowners who have wetland impacts on their property can purchase from Magnolia to satisfy their wetland impacts with NRCS and become mitigated. So that's the process. It's not too complicated. But like I said here, there's kind of two parties that are affected by this program, and what the program is created for is, one is the landowners who are going to host a bank site, and then the other landowners who need the credits from those bank sites. There's kind of two perspectives here. The first perspective is the bank site landowner perspective. And what does it mean to host a bank site? Your bank sponsor, again, that's Magnolia or whoever your mitigation banking company is, they will generally pay the landowner to put a conservation easement on the property. And that bank sponsor is then responsible for all restoration costs. They're also responsible for funding endowment to provide long-term monies for management and upkeep of the bank. And the bank sponsor also has the liability of maintaining that bank site. So it's not something that the landowner agrees to and then has extra worry on their mind. All liability is transferred to the bank sponsor. What the landowner can do, and the landowner continues to own the property. So the acceptable actions for landowners, they can still sell the property. The property is going to have this conservation easement on it, but they're still fully able to sell the property, still able to hunt on the property, other recreational things. And there's activities that can be agreed upon and laid out in the conservation easement if it's important to the landowner to make sure that they can still do that. The big takeaway here is, as long as you're not messing up the wetlands, probably figure out a way to make it work if you're looking to be a bank sponsor. In terms of what makes a good bank site, there's really no set acreages. Generally, we're looking for sites about 15 acres plus. Kind of want to put an asterisk there, though. If it's a particularly rare wetland type that needs that somebody needs to mitigate for, we could potentially look at something smaller. I think the way you can look at this program is you could do a bunch of little sites or a couple big ones. And our approach is kind of taking more big ones. And so that's why generally 15 acres plus makes the most sense for us. The land, though, is does need to be designated as prior converted cropland. The real reason for that is if you're trying to recreate a wetland on cropland, you would really like it to have once been a wetland. And if you restore the hydrology, then a lot of your work is done. So technically, you could probably build a bank on a non-prior converted site, but it would be a lot more difficult. And I actually don't quite know how you would do it. It doesn't mean it can't be done. But the idea of this program is kind of taking marginal farmland and turning it into wetlands to then help other producers somewhere else. Some of the other properties that we look for are things that would allow for quality wetland restoration. If the property is close to some other conservation zone, that could be great. Some logistical things could be important too. I mean, if there's a road leading right up to it and we can get people and supplies there, that could be a nice property for a bank site. So since this program is new, we are generally looking for these situations that allow for quality restoration and are these win-win scenarios for both us and the landowner. Most of our banks thus far have been hunting land. So the kind of the story is, from a landowner, you're going to pay me X amount of dollars per acre to restore this land and make it better hunting land, and I can still hunt on it. So the answer is yes. Great, sign me up. So those are the scenarios we're looking for. And the other thing too is we want these bank sites to make sense for the landowner. If I can, let's see, if I put it in here. Yeah. So if you look at this map here, this is one of our bank sites. It's down in Wayne County, Illinois. But this is the area we are building a bank on. That Oklahoma shape isn't really conducive for a landowner to do too much with it, right? If he wants to sell this, it's going to be kind of a pain to say, hey, yeah, this is weird shape. Or if he wants to do anything to his property, like, am I on my property here? Am I on the bank site here? And we were able to kind of go through and square out the edges for him and able to enroll some additional acreages of that property to kind of square it out. That way now he can build a path down here if he needs to access other parts of his property, or if he wants to sell off this parcel to somebody else, he can. It just kind of cleans it up a little bit. And that's what we're looking to do with these bank sites. We want to make sure that we have good ecological sites, but we also want to make sure that it makes sense for the landowners. And then the other thing that's usually pretty important is the landowner payments. And that is there's just a bunch of different ways to structure payments to landowners. Generally speaking, if we could pay in a lump sum just to put the conservation easement on these acres. We could also give payments to the landowner as credits are sold. Generally, if we do that, we can offer the landowner a little bit more. So I think the takeaway here is that, whatever makes sense for the landowner, as long as it makes sense for our property too, we'll be able to make it happen. I like the little flow charts. So I tried to make one for the general on how putting a site into a bank site works. So if we have a landowner who has a suitable land for restoration, they will come to terms with Magnolia. That's that conservation easement. It is what can and cannot happen on the property. It's a price per acre for the conservation that goes to Magnolia. Magnolia will take this site and put together a site plan to create a bank and submit that to the NRCS. The NRCS will take a look at it, give the final approval back to Magnolia, and then at that point we will give payment to the landowner, however that was decided, and we have a bank site. I will take another pause here. Are there any questions?
There were two questions in the chat. I want to, one of the first questions were, are these credits for ESA listed species only?
If that is if for the ag banking, no. But if we're talking about the species credits that I was talking about earlier, yeah, those credits are for specific species.
Okay. And there's one other question is, do Farm Bill provisions apply to historically farmed wetlands converted pre-1985?
No, so you're good. If you made any of your conversions prior to 1985, you are in compliance and you will not have to mitigate. I will say one thing from our perspective is, I think I maybe even get into it a little bit. Magnolia does not have anything to do with who is in compliance, who is out of compliance. We don't have any say on how many acres you need to mitigate for, which is really, really nice. It's basically that's figured out between the landowner and NRCS. And then we are just an option that if it makes sense for you, great. We have this available. Thanks, Laura. Okay, so the other end of the coin, or the other side of the coin here, is the landowner who needs mitigation. And this these credits can be used for land that's doesn't farmed wetland pasture, a wetland that has been cropped 8 or last 10 years, and are manipulated wetland, and really any converted wetland that the NRCS says is a converted wetland could be eligible for these credits. All right, so I did. Yeah, so the impacts and acreages are determined by NRCS and not by us. And basically what they do is they'll go out and do a wetland determination to say, hey, these are the acres that you have impacted and need to fix. And then once those acreages are identified, the landowner can reach out to us, the bank sponsor, to see if we have any credits available in that area. Let's say we do. The action items for the landowner needing credits is, it's simplified, but cut a check and move on. That once you have made the payment to us and we designate these credits from the bank to you, all liability on that particular impact is transferred to Magnolia, and you don't have to worry about it. We have found, you know, the people needing credit, the transactions size, so what I'm looking for, is generally been maybe around the 1 acre range, but we'll go as low as 1/10 of an acre. So I think one of the last ones we did was 3/10 of an acre. So a lot of these impacts aren't super huge. And that's why I think some of this program could be good, because, you know, sometimes it's really more of an annoyance than anything else with these little, you know, 1/10 of an acre impacts. Okay, so I like flowcharts, and so I made one to go over that process. When I looked at it, I know it's way too confusing. I'm not going to use it, but I did make it. The process for how it works with the landowner's buying credits is actually easier if you just read it out like this. So first thing is a producer requests, they either request a certified wetland determination or they had been given one by the NRCS for their impact. And then at that point, the NRCS could provide information about mitigation options, super helpful to us. They don't have to do that, but they certainly could. And then if the producer reaches out to us, they will then coordinate directly with Magnolia. And then what we'll do is we'll take that wetland determination, and then there's usually a functional assessment that has to get done on the property to determine how many credits would be needed to mitigate that. Magnolia will send all that into the NRCS for approval. So that's the wetland determination, that is functional assessment, that is bank location and credits available. And NRCS will review that and make sure that it fits all of the FSA criteria. And once that's given the green light, then the producer submits payment to Magnolia. Magnolia provides proof of payment to the NRCS, and then the NRCS issues an updated wetland map designating that impact as a mitigated wetland. And from there, that's the producer is in compliance, and they can go ahead and keep doing what they're doing from the wetland. Okay, so some of the benefits of agricultural mitigation banking. I think if we were to sum it up, it's relatively easy to use. So instead of these lengthy coordinations with NRCS to try to find another pocket of land that could work for a wetland, to bust up those drain tiles, to then plant and seed, what's the right mix to go if you're going to mitigate on your own. There's a lot of coordination that has to go back and forth. This is not that. You don't have to coordinate with really anybody except for a few documentations going back and forth between Magnolia, the landowner, and then also the landowner and NRCS. But boots on the ground stuff, you don't have to worry about that. Cost-effective option for farmers. It can be a lot cheaper than doing mitigation on other parts of your property if you have to hire contractors and consultants to do that. I will say too, this isn't always the best option. Sometimes the farmer might have the perfect spot and it's not too hard to convert that to a wetland and they know how to do it. And if this is the case, then great. This isn't the program for you. Go ahead and do it. But oftentimes this if you look at it, it's more cost effective for the landowner. And then the big one is this transfer of liability. So once you purchase the credits, that liability is now transferred to the bank sponsor, and the landowner doesn't have to worry about it anymore. Okay. The big question is, how much does all this cost? And that is a good question because it's not super straightforward. The whole objective of this program is to be an affordable option to producers. But there's a lot of things that affect what the pricing of these credits would be. Land values is a big one. Cost of restoration is another big factor for the price of these credits. Demand in the area could be a factor. But the whole goal is to get as low as possible to sustain a working program. Right now, that's about $15,000 credit at the current price. And I've talked to other ag bankers in Iowa, in Georgia, and they're about at that same price point too. We have been diving into Nebraska more so, and honestly, that's too low for Nebraska. Nebraska is probably going to be closer to $25,000 per credit. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. My thought is that as this market matures more and there's more providers and the modes of getting credit transactions done goes quicker, that will influence the cost of credits and they'll probably go down. Or if there's a lot more credits available, costs of credits will probably go down as well. So I think that's the future of pricing. But right now, if I were to ask, I think 15,000 a credit is pretty safe thing to quote people at. The other question is, am I even eligible? Is there a bank site that my property would be a part of? And so that's a question of service areas. And here is an example of the service area map we have for one of our banks. So this was our very first bank, St. Joseph. I actually see Bruce Stickers is on here. Hey, Bruce. Bruce has been managing these banks down here. They look great. But this is an example of the areas who could use credits from this bank site for their agricultural wetland impacts. If you look at our newest site, which is Fort Creek, this is the one that's part of the Chicago Wilderness region. The site is right here. This would be the service area. So anybody, you know, who's farming in these counties would be able to potentially use credits from this Fort Creek site for their impact. One thing I do want to point out is this is our first bank site, and this is our newest one. You can see that we're very scientific with where the credits would be using watersheds and ecoregions. And what we found out doing this program is, what about this person right here, right in the middle, this peninsula, it's not quite covered, or what about this person right here? Then you think, oh, how often is that going to happen? It ended up happening a lot. And so it kind of slowed down the whole process with getting extra approvals and maybe looking at, do we have to do additional mitigation to meet the producer who's just outside this line? Kind of became a speed bump, I think, for progress. And so moving forward, with some lessons learned, someone made the executive decision to either include the county or not include the county. And it's kind of smoothed things out a little bit. Questions on pricing or service area before I move on?
Yes, there's a question. The first one is, can pre-1985 conversions be converted back to wetland via the land bank?
Yes, yeah. In fact, that's what we look for. Those make the best bank sites, because typically the hydrology was historically there, and to convert it to a bank site, it's kind of busting up drain tiles and then replanting native stuff and watching the hydrology. So yes, 100% prior FSA maps, if your area is prior converted, would probably make a great bank site.
Okay. And then if Magnolia assumes all mitigation bank liability, even though the landowner still owns a property, if there is an incident on the property, for example, serious injury of an acquaintance of the landowner, then Magnolia is liable for insurance claims?
God, that one's outside my wheelhouse. I can't say that. Yeah, I haven't really read those. I haven't taken the lawyer's eye to the conservation easements. I find it very hard to believe that we would be responsible for injuries on people's land. We're more responsible for the upkeep of the natural areas.
Another question is, would the conservation easement land need to be designated as FW or W? Michelle, do you want to unmute and clarify that?
Yeah, I was just wondering if the conservation easement had to have the designation from Farm Services as farm wetland, or can it just be a general wetland?
For the easement, I guess
The site of
for
the site of the wetland mitigation project.
So like the bank site.
Yeah.
And the question is, can it currently be a wetland and work as a bank site?
I think it's about the designation for the easement. Would it need to be designated as a farm wetland or a wetland in order to be considered already? Is that what you mean, Michelle? Like prior designation?
Yeah.
So pretty much the only sites we can use are non-wetlands or prior converted wetlands for bank sites. Does that-
Okay,
And if it doesn't help, then I don't know the answer to your question.
okay.
Finally, are service areas determined by NRCS or by bank owners?
Both.
Or
It's a
counties.
partnership. So we'll submit things that make sense to the NRCS, and then we work with them to hammer out what those areas will be. And so that's kind of a good segue, because the approach that we took to obtaining the grants, all the grants actually, was a programmatic approach to what ag banking could be in the state. So really, these grants are a partnership with the NRCS. They're a regulatory agency that kind of has oversight, but they're also a partner agency because we're trying to figure this out together. And so there's not it's not really conflicts between us and them. We're trying to figure out how this program would make sense. And that was Magnolia's approach to ag banking. When we applied for the grant, there's some of the first grants that came through the USDA grant program were kind of a one-off banks. Like, let's build a bank and then try to sell the credits. Our approach was, let's build the program, and part of that program, we have to build banks as part of it, but the main focus is on building kind of a program that's sustainable and can be duplicated. And so our approach was, for Illinois and Indiana, was to do an umbrella banking instrument, which basically means it's a regulatory document that says, hey, this is what ag banking is for the state of Illinois. And things will get figured out, like what is ag banking? What do the easements look like? What does the monitoring look like? What are performance standards? What is the endowment or long-term funding going to look like? So those kind of big overall or overreaching things that have to get figured out for any bank was figured out in one umbrella banking instrument. In Illinois, it's called the Illinois Conservation Exchange. Indiana, the Indiana one was actually just approved like a month ago. So that's up and running now. It's the Indiana Conservation Exchange. And so basically what that allows for, it allows for a lot of the red tape to get figured out ahead of time and approved. And then when you get to the actual bank site part, you can focus on specific bank site things. So what are the specific performance standards of this bank site, and how many credits specifically is it going to generate, and what are the actual maps for these sites? So our goal there was to kind of standardize a program and then make it so additional bank sites could fall under that umbrella. If you're going to do it that way, it really makes sense to have high quality credits. We kind of call them credits or acres, but really what it is functions of a wetland. And I have referred to that functional assessment, but basically these wetlands are broken down into like 9 essential functions, and then there's tables to calculate what the function of each particular wetland is. And you can imagine that if you have kind of a for lack of better term, like a crappy, so you have a crappy bank and like a kind of good wetland that you're impacting, your crappy bank isn't quite good enough to do 1 acre of this will compensate 1 acre of this. So you potentially have to do 1.5 acres or 2 acres of the crappy wetland to compensate for the impact. You can alleviate a lot of that. Is your bank site is of really high quality, and most of the impacts that come that farmers need to mitigate for are not, high quality sedge meadows or nice mature forested wetlands. They're kind of crappy reed canary fields or shrubby cottonwood, wooded areas. So if our bank sites are of really high quality, we'll be able to mitigate for pretty much anything that comes through that needs mitigation at a 1-to-1 ratio. and not have to complicate it for the landowner. The other thing that we want to do, and as part of building high quality wetlands, but then also the ability to add more, is let's say we do one and it's really successful, and then we have to go, oh man, all right, that was great. Now let's wait 2 years for us to get another banking instrument done, find another site, do the restoration, get these credits available. And instead, we have this banking instrument that allows for the banks to exist, and then we can go and start making new banks when it makes sense to do so. Basically, if you're going to have a program, be able to have a way for more credits to come online, people are actually using them. And then the third thing is we want to make the process as smooth as possible. Part of that is developing credits that satisfy the most common impacts. It doesn't make a ton of sense to do a herbaceous wetland in a part of the state where it's typically forested wetlands that are impacted. And so doing some research on what type of wetlands to create and where is very important. And something else that we've found to be important is Magnolia is designated an internal ag banking team, kind of have the same people working on these projects across 3 states. And it's funny, what you learn in Nebraska might help you in Indiana, or what you learn in Indiana might help you in Illinois. Some of those lessons learned, you don't have to learn them twice. You can learn them once and apply it across all geographies. And that service area example I had was a good one, where we were able to take some lessons learned and convert those service areas to where they're cleaner. And that's what we're doing for some of the new states we're working in. Program to date, and specifically in the Chicago Wilderness region, we have our newest site is the Fort Creek site. It is not quite approved yet, but soon. I was hoping it'd be done by the end of the year. Maybe it will, but January, I'm hoping. And so that one is right in the heart of the Chicago Wilderness Alliance region. And that is a bank in partnership with the Forest Preserve District of Will County, who have been incredible, really good partners with that, hosting that bank site. And that site will generate a total of 65 credits. We think with the way it's progressing, performance standards, will be able to have at least 30, probably more, available sometime in 2024. So that is exciting, something to look out for. The other thing is Indiana. So the program, the Illinois grant, we started in 2016. I think we did the first bank in 2018. Indiana is a few years behind because Indiana just got its first grant this year to introduce the program, which we're running. Because of those lessons learned, it should move a lot quicker than Illinois, because we ironed out some of the kinks. But that program grant was awarded early in 2023. We had some kickoff meetings in June, I believe, and we've already got the regulatory instrument approved. So that's exciting. We are currently in the process of doing the land search for bank sites. And some of the parameters of that Indiana grant is we need 2 bank sites permitted in 2024, and Northwest Indiana is one of our target zones. So there is a good chance that the Illinois and Indiana sections of Chicago Wilderness will have some sort of credits available, ag banking credits available in 2024. Though Wisconsin and Michigan are also represented. Both of those states received grants last year in 2022. I think Wisconsin might be, well, the Wisconsin DNR received the grant last year. And it looks like they are currently in their land search phase right now. And according to their website, they should have credits available in 2024. Michigan, I can't remember exactly, but I think Michigan has had banks in the past, but I do know that they also received grant last year in 2022, and their target zone was Southern Michigan. And so I do think that probably everything Chicago Wilderness touches will have a little element of ag banking next year, or if not 2025 at the latest. So that's part of the reason why I wanted to talk a little bit today. Magnolia has been a part of it for the last 5 years, but it's growing and it's kind of a cool program. The very last thing I wanted to kind of touch on today is when I was talking at that panel about careers in conservation, it was apparent to me that some of the things that companies do in these emerging markets isn't completely part of the mainstream yet. And I think part of that is because we're still fleshing out how these programs work. There's still a lot of them are pretty new. But if you take just a snapshot of Magnolia, and what does it take to make an ag banking program, like an emerging market program, we're kind of divided into 4 teams: a regulatory team, land team, ops team, sales team. There's a lot of, we go through teams, but it's like a good way to designate us. And if you look at what you have to do for an emerging market, using ag banking as an example, like our regulatory team, they have to draft the umbrella banking instrument, submit all the grant documentation, so they write some of the easement stuff, and obviously I'm not part of the regulatory team, which is why I'm not great at answering those easement questions. But they write the easement documentation, and some of the background for those people were in environmental policy, in economics, scientific journal editing. So these are some of the skill sets that people in our regulatory team had before they came to Magnolia. And if you look at their degrees, the degrees are environmental science, economics, evolutionary biology. Take a look at the land team. What do they do for ag banking? They find bank sites, they have to sign up landowners, they have to submit all the closing documentation, file the easements. The background of those staff are land acquisition and GIS and algorithm making, and sure, some basic environmental understanding, but also understanding land values. And those staff, their degrees are in computer science, urban development, environmental studies, and economic policy. Ops team is my team, and this is like the traditional conservation restoration. We conduct the restoration, the monitoring, quality control, coordinating contractors, project management. Backgrounds before coming to Magnolia: ecological restoration, land management, project management, consulting, biology. The degrees is exactly what you would expect them to be: environmental biology, ecology, environmental geography. And then the sales team, they have sales, credit ledgers, bill of sale, all the marketing stuff kind of goes through our sales team. Again, these backgrounds and degrees are in political science, economics and law, sustainability, economics. The reason why I went through all of this with the degrees and what we do is traditional conservation is the ops team. Like if you think about that, that is what you think of traditional conservation programs. But as these markets emerge and there's these new vehicles for land conservation, I mean, you can see the traditional background in conservation is only a quarter of what we do. And honestly, the land and regulatory team is probably, it doesn't get kicked off the ground until those guys get their grasp on it. So all these different backgrounds and all these different skill sets are really contributing to meaningful conservation across the whole country, but also specifically in the Chicago Wilderness region. And with that, that is it. That is all I kind of want to run you guys through with ag banking. Happy to answer more questions.
It's really interesting, Mike. There are a few more questions in the chat. Jeff Weiss asks, how does NRCS identify wetlands where mitigation is required? Is there a crackdown on wetland destruction at the moment? Biden administration, ? Do these matters tend to drag on for years?
Do they drag on? So this is my side view of it, because we do get people who have impacts. Yes, I do think sometimes they do drag on long. because, I mean, generally speaking, if you're an ag producer and somebody says, hey, you have a wetland that you're farming, your first answer is, no, I don't. You're wrong. And then there does seem to be a little bit of time and effort saying, hey, why are you saying this is a wetland? This isn't a wetland. I've been farming this for 20 years. What are you talking about? I have seen that from the side. Luckily, that's not a fight that I get involved in, or Magnolia doesn't have to get involved in. Ag banking doesn't get involved in that fight. That's kind of between the landowner and the NRCS. But yes, I have seen that. The question but they're not all like that. The question to crack down, though, is, I don't know, is the short answer. Again, if I had to guess, I don't think the NRCS has the staff to kind of go through their areas and go, oh, that's a violation, that's a violation, that's a violation. In fact, I was in Nebraska doing this program a couple months ago, and we were driving around with the NRCS person, and she was pointing out, there's a violation there, there's a violation there, there's a violation there. We just don't have time and resources to get to it yet. So I think oftentimes they're aware of it, but there just has to be a time and place. If somebody complains, then they'll have to go out there and investigate. But no, I don't think they have like a crackpot team that's going out there to find these impacts. And if I had to guess why not, I think it's a matter of time and resources.
Okay, thank you. And then how long does the liability attach for the bank?
Yep. So that's a permanent conservation easement that's on that bank. So Magnolia is responsible for that bank in perpetuity. But there is a certain point when the endowment funds take over. So essentially, once that bank site is sold out, the liability from like a sponsor standpoint isn't necessarily like, hey, you need to fix this now, and whatever it costs is what it costs. You're capped at whatever you were negotiated with at the long-term endowment cost. But that goes on forever.
And then the final question so far is, so it sounds like wetland restoration needs to be completed and approved before bank credits are available to purchase. Is that correct?
Kind of. Again, that's where you get into every state is different. For Illinois and for this Fort Creek site, we are generally that's the right way to say it. Once you put the permanent conservation easement on the property, you are released a certain amount of credits. It's different in every state. We should be getting half in Illinois. In Nebraska, I think we get 30%. And the idea behind that is so people don't have to wait 5 years, 6 years to get credits. Let's release some of it now, and as long as you are meeting performance standards, additional credits are released every year. That's also good from a landowner standpoint too. If you put your bank in as a bank site and decide, hey, I'd rather get paid when credits are sold, you don't have to wait 7 years, 5 years for you to start receiving some payments. You can get some credits released immediately upon the protection element. Good questions. All right, how do we do? Yeah, a little over an hour. That's great. Well, let me do this. Let me put my contact information back up here. There it is. if you do have questions about, well, absolutely, if you have questions about agricultural wetland mitigation banking, please give me a call, send me an email, visit our website. Our website actually has some pretty good information about this, but also some of the other emerging markets. But also if you have questions about those emerging markets, please feel free to reach out as well. It's kind of cool. I really like what I'm doing here at Magnolia. It seems like a lot of what we do is first of its kind. And I kind of like figuring out the kinks and making sure those aren't problems in the future. And we do a lot of that here. So I'm happy to talk about it if anybody wants to.
Thank you so much, Mike.
Thanks.
I put in the chat, I wanted to thank the Illinois Department of Natural Resources and the U.S. Forest Service for the support for these cafes. And they do this so that communities can improve urban canopies across the region, including through their participation in Tree City USA. And there's more information about that in the chat. But thank you so much for everyone for joining us today. And I will get this information out to everyone shortly.
Thanks, everyone.